Hello, this is Trammell Crow, founder of EarthX. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to the CleanEquity Monaco annual conference being presented exclusively to the entire world by EarthX TV. CleanEquity Monaco was founded 12 years ago by my friend and colleague, His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II of Monaco, and his partner, Mr. Mungo Park. This conference is hosted by Innovator Capital, the London impact-based investment bank. This CleanEquity Monaco conference will feature presentations by the world's leading technology companies focused on achieving profitability and solutions to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, especially the climate crisis. We'll conclude the conference today with a presentation of the CleanEquity Awards created by renowned artists all over the world and presented by Prince Albert II of Monaco. Thank you for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome to CleanEquity 2020. Our welcome extends far beyond the room this year with our broadcasting partners in Dallas, EarthX. And with them, we're reaching out to the world for the first time for CleanEquity. It's always a pleasure to open this conference. The anticipation of an exciting program, debating, learning about amazing technologies, food for thought, new friends and connections is always exciting. As you can imagine, we are particularly glad to be doing so this year. Standing in person before some of you here in Monaco and reaching out to others in your homes and your offices around the world, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be together. We've all learned a great deal about resilience in the last 6 months, or the past 6 months. Our children have learned how to learn from home, our businesses to operate under extraordinary constraints, many remotely. Furthermore, societies across the world have now been forced to accept the lesson that we must come together to defeat global problems. We shall undoubtedly, over the coming 2 days, continue to learn from each other and have a productive conference. And those of you who have been before will notice a slight broadening of the agenda, a slight but very important broadening of the agenda this year. We are including SDG 4, Quality Education for All. Sustainability and innovation depend, surely they depend on a bedrock of quality education. Of course, as always, there's some housekeeping to cover. For those of us in the room, when you have the urge to ask a question, please go to the mic over there next to Stephen and Connor, because we're not supposed to pass a mic around to everybody, but there is a mic there which will be cleaned regularly. We have a timetable to cover. So please keep an eye on the schedule. We will start everything on time, not only because that's a sensible thing to do, but there are other people around the world who are relying on us to do that. So please heed the timings on the agenda. Tomorrow, His Serene Highness will come in the afternoon to talk to us, and also to, having chaired the judging panel, he will then make the awards and present the awards to those that have excelled. So if you're traveling with a friend and you'd like to bring them along, or they'd like to come to the award ceremony tomorrow, please talk to Ilona on the front desk and have them registered. We welcome anybody that would like to come along. Lastly, and absolutely not leastly, a big thank you to our sponsors who never flinched. Not one of them. Absolutely extraordinary. They've remained solid with us to ensure that CleanEquity 2020 went ahead. Those sponsors they include Covington, Parkview, Taranis Fuels, Cision, EIT, Climate-KIC, who we'll be hearing from later, as well as Covington and Taranis, BP Ventures, Earth Capital, Cranfield University, and EduFront. I also would like to thank the Monaco Tourism Board for their support and for last night, and also the Monte Carlo Fairmont. Valérie Ducassou and her colleagues have been absolutely extraordinary. So there, I think we're pretty much on schedule. It's time for me to stop talking now and introduce you to our co-hosts, the Monaco Economic Board, and particularly the Deputy Chief Executive, Justin Hyman. Justin, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mungo. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Mungo, first of all, welcome to everybody present in this room, but also online. Many thanks for making it to Monaco, and we do hope that you have a fantastic time, even virtually. We're very pleased to be here today for this 2020 edition of CleanEquity Monaco, and we'd like to warmly thank Mungo and his dynamic team for maintaining this quality event this year, despite difficult circumstances. I would like to begin with a short film and message from His Serene Highness Prince Albert II.
Whether under the sea in a tropical reef, in the depths of a luxurious primary forest, or on a continent covered by ice, an ecosystem is made up of a set of complex and connected interactions. In the economic field, we also talk about the ecosystem when organizing an environment which benefits all its stakeholders. The Principality of Monaco is a perfect example. Its success and achievements are based on several factors. First of all, our political regime, the constitutional monarchy, brings the stability and the time needed to enable projects and ideas to come to fruition. Our liberal vision of the economy, coupled with an effective social model, supports prosperous and harmonious development. Thanks to rigorous and dynamic management of our financial resources, our country has no public debt and has a constitutional reserve fund, guardian of its independence, which provides protection in the event of a financial crisis. This allows for the implementation of a development policy and strategy which stimulate investment and encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. Our diversified and balanced economy is successful and internationally oriented. But progress only has meaning if it is sustainable. This concern is at the heart of my actions, both as head of state and as president of my foundation. Almost 140 nationalities benefit from an exceptional environment, a local atmosphere and well-being which makes the Principality a unique place to live. This commitment reflects the very nature of our city-state, its human dimension.
So a few words also on the Monaco Economic Board. We are the entity in charge of promoting the economy of the Principality and also the operational arm of the government of Monaco. And in that regard, we'd also like to extend very warmly a welcome to all of you. As you can see from this slide, we have several missions. The first one being one of the Monaco Chamber of Commerce, and as its name suggests, doing events Chambers of Commerce do, notably networking events and partnering prestigious conferences like this one, as well as organizing trade missions abroad. Another side of our business is Invest in Monaco, trying to help entrepreneurs like yourselves to look at Monaco as a potential business destination to set up within the country. So please feel free during the next couple of days to come and see us and discuss any projects, any questions that you may have. We have a stand just outside, and we'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. Most importantly today, we would like to introduce you to our Center of Excellence for Innovation and Technology called Monaco Tech, and its director, who's here with us today, Lionel Galfrey. We're very excited about this project that was created just 3 years ago, because we believe it is the last part of the jigsaw of the innovation ecosystem here in Monaco, and will help enhance the country's drive towards digitalizing the economy and attracting innovative companies like yourselves to set up in Monaco. Please, Lionel, come through and tell us more about Monaco Tech.
Thank you very much, Justin. Good morning and welcome to this event. I am very happy to be here as Monaco Tech. I just want to present you what we are doing every day. So, I just want to start with a little film. So now I will speak about Monaco Tech, what we are and what we do. Monaco Tech is a startup program of the Principality. Monaco Tech was set up 3 years ago. It's an initiative from the government and with Xavier Niel and Monaco Telecom. And now we have 3 years. Our missions, what are our missions? We believe that the innovation, if it's not shared, does not make sense. This is a real conviction we have. Our mission are support and extend innovative projects, generate added value in accordance with the Principality values. So we want to create value through employment and economic benefits. But we want to support values of the Principality, as you've seen before in the film we saw. And we are here to deliver business best practice, because we have to have a financial viability for this project. If not, innovation does not make sense if innovation is not a success, economic success. What are our values? Our values are the human. We believe that we have to support this project, but these projects have to be supported by human qualities, and we take care about human qualities when we select projects. We believe in innovation. Entrepreneurs are here to support innovations. And as we are Monaco, we want to work for quality and quality over quantity. this is the reason why we have a strong selection. And because we are Monaco and because we are only 2 square meters, we have to do tailor-made. We want to support our companies, but we want to follow them. In 4 words, our job is to enabling innovation that matters. Our sectors are this one you can see on this slide: green tech, energy, fintech, medtech, yachting, and the other one on the top of this slide. These sectors have a sense for Monaco, make sense for Monaco. In few numbers, these are our history since 3 years. Thank you very much. And I'm here, we are here with Justin on the stand, and we can answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and we can certainly work more closely together because we have a number of ideas and companies that we would like to share with you. So we can talk about that later. So we are reasonably well on time now. I'm going to introduce Kirsten Dunlop, who's joining us from Utrecht. Kirsten is the Chief Executive Officer at Climate-KIC. And what is fascinating about this, Kirsten, is that our models, our ambitions, and everything are so similar from the point of view of sourcing and selecting and implementing sustainable technologies that we are delighted to have you here. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Mango. It's an enormous pleasure to be here. Good morning to everybody. Both online and with the luxury and privilege to be present in Monaco. Let me introduce myself. I'm going to a couple of slides, and then I'll pull off the slides just to create a little bit of variation from the prospect of looking at me for 20 minutes. Let me share the screen for a minute, if I can. Here we go. Just let me know if this works. You can see? Okay, all good. So let me start with just a brief perspective on EIT Climate-KIC. We are a public-private instrument acting as an agency or a platform for climate innovation, both addressing resilience and addressing decarbonization. And we've been active for about 10 years. We are part of the European Commission instrument, if you like, portfolio of instruments to promote research and innovation. And at the same time, we are a private company working in concert and partnership with others. We have a number of organizations that make up our community all over Europe, a very diverse community committed to action together. And we work with and through others constantly in partnership with what we describe as challenge owners, country governments, regional governments, city governments, and industry, large-scale industry. And just to give a sense of where I'm speaking from, we are proud to claim that we are the largest CleanTech accelerator in the world, climate change focused accelerator. We have 32 accelerators across Europe. We've learned a lot about what it means to promote and encourage entrepreneurship, climate technologies, climate smart solutions for 10 years. And much of that learning has been translated into the approaches that we are taking now and that have catalyzed our arrival here to speak to you this morning. And a number of our startups are now beginning to be household names in the climate space. But that leads me as a starting position to talk to you about this. A sense of the challenges, the unique and quite unprecedented nature of the challenge that we face, that brings us all together in this room to think about, and perhaps if I can connect to the introductory comments you have in the brochure for this event, to think about COVID-19 as a dress rehearsal for the crisis effects of climate change that will call for us or from us not only an understanding of a need for transformative differences in what we're doing, because as you know, and as you see on this chart, the path to dependencies of our political decision-making and our economic decision-making at the moment are not coherent with a prosperous and stable society. And we know that the extent of structural change that we require is well beyond what we have hitherto managed to pull together, and significantly well beyond the mechanisms that we have in place in terms of governance, decision-making and investment that we will be able to use. We need to change quite significantly what we're doing. Not only that, but we know we're going to need, and this is where COVID-19 teaches us as a set of lessons, we know we're going to need to deal with a series of repeated shocks and crises that will hamper our ability to act in organized, structural, mechanical, and sort of well-ordered ways. We know innovation is absolutely essential. That's why we're here. The question is, what role does it play? How do we use innovation? And how do we tackle something of what we need to tackle here, and the nature and the scale of the challenge? There are two orders of challenges as we see it, acting from where we are in the heart of an innovation system in Europe and acting globally. One, on the one hand, is that the problems we face are inherently systemic. We are dealing with connected series of feedback loops of causes and effects, relationships, not single individual problems. And we need our solutions to join up and to create exponential orders of difference, to change whole value chains, or to change or to enable whole value chains to shift on their axes and redefine value itself. We need a mechanism, we need models, approaches, ways of working and investing in innovation that enable us to design it, to develop, to deploy, and to structure medium, short, long-term and medium-term investment mechanisms that allow and enable innovation to catalyze change in multiple ways, connected and related in systemic ways. The other problem we have is complexity. It's not just the challenge, the transformations we need to make are deeply interdependent, connected, joined up, and acting systemically, but the systems we're dealing with are complex and adaptive, which means that they don't act predictably. It is literally impossible for us to predict and plan for a set of predictable effects or expected effects. We're going to have to deal with the fact that we are managing, putting our hands into, starting with ourselves, our own social systems, our systems of behavior and responses. We are handling something that is inherently beyond a logical way of thinking, or inherently different to a logical way of thinking. And that requires us to be able to develop innovation that is ready or equipped to deal with that kind of context. It means we need safe-to-fail experiments, we need options, we need ways of rapidly adapting quickly, of testing, catalyzing, noticing effects, and developing above all a capability, both in terms of how we do innovation and in terms of how we invest in it, that is prepared for complex dynamics of change. And if I give you an example of the combination of these two things, a need for and the opportunity to think and act systemically, and the reality of the fact that as we do so, we're going to be dealing with nonlinear, unpredictable effects. Take the example of COVID. We have cities all over the world, let's just start with Europe, that have from 1 month to the next found themselves emptied of cars, quiet, people working from home, increasingly struggling with the mental health effects of being locked up or in lockdown or forced back into lockdown for months on end, suddenly discovering what's possible with virtual technologies, experiencing for the first time the reality of what systems mean when supermarkets don't have foods or don't have particular products, and starting to comprehend in very practical terms what connected, joined up global systems mean, both in terms of their fragility and in terms of the implications of trying to change. And we've at the same time had cities all of a sudden nicer to live in, nicer to walk through, less polluted, less congested, beginning to be environments where one notices the opportunity to do very, very different things in the urban environment. And that opens up to a world of possibility for the kind of systems innovation that we believe is really needed. For example, opportunities within cities to rewild, to bring trees and organic materials back into construction, to think about urban farming to mitigate the risk of food system security, to think about the fact that rewilding and bringing trees and plants to reclaim streets back into green spaces creates jobs, very hard to automate. It creates opportunities for moments of community solidarity in a context, for example, of COVID, to convert into something more consolidated that looks after aging populations, that reconnects a sense of society and community, that also addresses mental health and well-being issues that are some of the key issues, that requalifies and cleans the air and changes the emissions footprint dramatically within cities, offers opportunities to introduce nature-based solutions within the physical structure of cities and construction and planning, that in itself also is a better mitigant for heat stress and for water stress, as we know, and begins to offer an opportunity to change, fundamentally change the way in which we think about transport and mobility. And some of the electric aviation solutions start to come in, but it all requires a connected set of shifts in opportunities and a connected set of actions to change and introduce and consolidate shifts in behavior, in planning, in procurement, in financing mechanisms, in technology solutions, in behavioral change, in community engagement. And that's the, and it has to address the fact that, for example, one of the unexpected but unfortunate effects of COVID is to drive people back into individual cars for a sense of their own safety and security. So trying to work with the unexpected and unpredictable effects of that and find ways to reincorporate that change or that impulse back into decarbonized transport or decarbonized solutions. So what at Climate-KIC we have chosen to do, and would like to introduce a session that you'll hear about in terms of what does this mean for investors and for startups and for the world of investment in clean tech. We have started to experiment with a very different way of innovating so that we can test and learn for ways of engaging on all of these mechanisms together and bring our technologies together and join them up. We launched something that we called Deep Demonstrations in 2019, principally because we wanted to put our own, if you like, money where our mouth is and connect up our statements about what's needed with what it is that we're actually doing, and work with cities at a whole scale, work with countries at a whole scale, work with regions and global value chains, and start looking at how we might bring together innovations in a very, very different way, creating portfolios of innovation at a whole city scale, connecting in and plugging in and bringing life and activating multiple solutions simultaneously, all plugged in to different points of intervention. If it looks something like this, where you work with a city, for example, we're working with the city of Madrid, and you take the entire city perimeter and you start by looking very carefully, for example, at what is it that the city actually needs to transform, and where is it particularly attached to a sense of itself, a sense of individual identity and sense of work and travel, mobility and leisure. So what is it that needs to change, not just in terms of net emissions or technology or substitution, but what is it that might need to shift or be meaningfully engaged with in terms of a sense of identity? We put together a full portfolio of innovations that implies not a distributed financial portfolio so much as a a real economy spatial portfolio, if you like, activating for the city 30 to 100 simultaneous innovation initiatives, each of which is intervening with a different aspect of the physical environment of the city: buildings, planning, financial mechanisms, the way in which trees or organic material can be reincorporated into buildings, new technologies in fabrics, mechanisms for consumer behavior or social change, participatory governance, and so on, waste, water, energy, mobility, solutions, all connected up. We ensure that those solutions are inherently different from one another so that we can do rapid, safe experiments, and above all, harness the value of innovation to learn, and to learn fast about what would effectively enable a whole city perimeter of transformation. And what matters most importantly about this, if we then come to the context of CleanEquity and this Monaco event, what does that mean for investors, for the large companies that we are partnered with, that the City of Madrid is partnered with, and for the institutional investors, both at national, institutional, international scale, as well as private investors looking with interest at what is happening, because the economic case for what is happening, for example, in Madrid, is really very significant. I think there's two things I'd wish to just briefly retouch upon before passing on to the next session. One is the implications for entrepreneurs of this kind of approach, and the other is the implication for investment itself. From the perspective of an entrepreneur working in this kind of environment, there are two elements that matter enormously. One is that this kind of context, this sort of systemic approach to innovation, inherently connects buyers and sellers. It's providing a large, worked, contained and supported environment to connect innovators and their solutions directly into possible markets and to possible buyers, with an opportunity for extended proofs of concept. And a lot of the work that's going on here depends upon connecting those innovators one to the other, even if they're competitors, and providing a systematic experiential learning mechanism, constantly looking at what's working, what's getting stuck, where is it working, what combination of solutions, if these four things were to act together, what's the larger order scale change and large order multidimensional business model that's possible. And I'll give you just a flash into what something like that looks like. So it begins to create a very different possibility for rapid learning, market mating, partnerships, and scaling. We also insist upon the fact that the community engaged here needs to be significantly enlarged, well beyond the conventional containers of clean tech, of technology innovation, really pulling in social change, policy innovation, financial innovation, and the full suite of mechanisms and unusual actors and unexpected partnerships in doing so. From the investment perspective, this is a distribution of risk in quite a significant way. But in addition, what's happening here is the possibility of intervening in the making of whole systems change, and with that, the making of markets. And some of what emerges from this kind of work is the multi-dimensional business models that begin to have more than one cash flow traveling together, often non-correlated, and beginning to create value creation, not just in the short and mid-term, but in long-term, again, non-correlated ways. This is an image of an outfit in Australia called Sundrop Farms, which is a combination of innovations that emerge from the kind of systems approach that I'm describing, where you have literally 8 different cash flows as a result of a series of solutions brought together within a frame that has been deliberately and systematically constructed as an inquiry into the possibility of innovation changing whole systems. And just as an interesting element of it, the land that was bought to set this entire initiative up at the time, the underlying land value of this enterprise as a result of what it's managed to do is a multiple 500. It's an extraordinary shift in thinking about value and value creation. And it opens, I think, an opportunity to really reframe what is it that investors can do, and how can institutional and private investment holders of private capital engage with a very, very different order of innovation, putting hands into literally the structures, systems, and mechanisms of our ways of working and begin to shape the way in which they play forward, reaching well beyond the limits of what we have hitherto been able to do with fantastic, and speaking as a proponent of many of the startups that Climate-KIC has been supporting, with fantastic solutions that are still nonetheless tending to stay within the confines of sectors, still tending to look for capital coming into the single point of investment, and still tending to rely upon the outlying mechanisms of market growth and commercialization to produce an effect. This is a call for action, if you like, to engage with innovation and with the power of investment behind innovation in a significantly larger, more transformative, more ambitious approach that makes it possible, or at least challenges all of us to consider redesigning the fabric of the way in which we work and live and play quickly in time to address both crisis and to give ourselves options and alternatives for a more prosperous future. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Kirsten, thank you. That was extraordinary. I learn more and more and more each time I hear you speak, and clearly, again, the room for cooperation between what Climate-KIC is doing in technologies, what we're doing, and also what Monaco Tech is doing. I mean, more and more and more reasons to work together. So we move right along now. We're going to kick off with the first plenary session, which will be an extension of what Kirsten was talking about. It will be led by Dominik Hofstetter, who is in Zurich, I believe, at the moment, and he's the Director of Capital Investments and a member of the Executive Board of Climate-KIC. So, Yvette, if you wouldn't mind joining me up here, we can join with Dominik and Martin Sellers of BP. Excellent. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Mungo, and the entire team at Innovative Capital for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. It's a privilege to be here or be in Monaco virtually, and it's a privilege to have very distinguished individuals with me on the panel. I like moderating panels because it gives me license to ask the tough questions in the name of entertainment, because you may agree that there's nothing worse about a conference than a boring panel. And so I'm going to follow on right from what Kirsten has, the way that Kirsten has set the stage in terms of making us reflect upon the ways that the world has thought about and engaged innovation in service of the climate crisis, and make us reflect upon what's working, what's not working, and how we might change the paradigms, structures, and practices of both entrepreneurship, but also, particularly in this panel, venture capital in the space of tech. With me today are three panelists. I'm just going to introduce very briefly. We have on site in Monaco, Yvette Go. Good morning, Yvette. Yvette is a chemical engineer by training, has started her career at Shell and DSM before moving to Ventures, which was a CleanTech capital firm at the time where she was a partner. She then moved on to the European Investment Fund, where she was the head of social and environmental impact investment, if I got that right.
Yes.
And she is currently a senior investment manager at Capricorn, which is a manager of private and listed equity funds that invests in innovative technology companies. She holds a master's in chemical engineering from the University of Delft and an MBA from IESE Business School. I hope I got that right, Yvette.
Thank you, Dominic. Yes,
Brilliant.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Also with us today, from remote, like me, is Martin Sellers. Martin has had a very distinguished career at BP, where he spent as far as I can tell from LinkedIn profile, all of the bulk of his career, the last 20 years, in different parts of the business, first on the traditional side, and since 2010, enrolled related to alternative energy and innovation. And he is currently a venture principal at BP Ventures, which is the corporate venture arms of BP. Martin holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Manchester. Did I get that right, Martin?
You did, yes.
Brilliant. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Mongo with us also in Monaco directly. Mongo started his career in corporate finance at Nomura, then founded in 2003 Innovative Capital, which is a specialist corporate firm focused on the health sector and on the climate change sector. He has also been a director of a health company called Metabolics for 9 years, and most importantly, he's the co-founder of this conference, which he co-founded back in 2006. Mongo, did I get that right?
Spot on.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. We have a bit of a difficulty hearing you from the plenary. I wonder whether it's just me or whether
Is that better? Is that better?
Just means that we need to listen really carefully, and there's also a little bit of delay in the connection, but we'll be able to manage.
Test it.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, it's a little
Bit better. Can we lift the mic a little bit, please? Here, both mics. Is that better now?
Can you hear us, Dominic?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Merci
beaucoup.
I'll look at Mongo anyway when I speak.
I can hear you. and I can see you.
All right, so we're going to come back to what Kirsten has told us in her opening panel. We'll do a little bit of a warm-up first, just to get this started. Yvette, I'd like to start with you. You have first worked in industry for quite a while, and then for what I would call a classic CleanTech venture capital firm, before joining the EIF, and you're now back at what I would call an organization that does operate classic CleanTech venture capital arm at Capricorn. As you reflect upon what Kirsten said, and as you look ahead into what some scientists call the decisive decade, what, in your experience, will differentiate a good venture capital firm from a bad one?
Well, I think there's probably there's the financial answer, but I think I like the holistic answer better. Sorry, do I have to talk like this, or? If I look back, I was actually just thinking what you were saying is very interesting, because I started in my university times, and this is like 25 years ago, doing sort of tutoring for a subject called Chemistry and Society. And that was actually looking at what is the impact of all the chemical technologies on society, and we talked about Bhopal and things like that. It's 25 years ago, and if you look where, and it was the grey socks. I remember it was not a very popular subject. I did it because I felt it was important to embed what we did in technology into society. Now we are 25 years later, and I think the good news, when I heard Kirsten speaking in terms of where we have to go next, I thought, well, the good part is we have gotten somewhere very different. I think the part is now people realize that we need to collaborate, not just financial, but also governments and universities and society, citizens who have a voice and are actually very, very instrumental in getting some changes driven. To mention an example is for instance, plant-based technology, food. This is a technology that's actually that's just an example of something it's a consumer trend. And I think if you want to look forward, and so you're coming back to your question, what's going to be the next 25 years? Is that a venture capitalist who's successful, and if you're truly sustainable, you can't sit alone and just think of your own financial numbers. You have to work together. If you want to be successful and you want deployment, you need to engage other stakeholders. It cannot longer be that private equity is just this financial institution or financial player who just thinks, I'm just going to maximize my profits in this world, because we had the crisis that followed it, and unfortunately, not everybody has learned. But I think if you want to have this is true sustainability, it goes beyond 25 years, it goes beyond 50 years. You have to work together with the people around you. And this is why it's true, I made a step from going from direct investments into indirect investments. I'll be happy later on we'll get some more on the government side of things. And now going back in direct investments is because I believe that also in a venture capital fund, which is commercially oriented and set up in a classical structure, you still need to be very, very conscious that everything you do and everything you advance, and what you're trying to advance is the key thing is to make sure that it brings a long-term benefit, or a real benefit to society, because that's also automatically where the sustainable business models come out of. Sorry, long answer, but to answer your question, that's the way I look at it.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll come back to the question of collaboration a little later. Great. Martin, you've been working for one of the world's oil and gas super majors for 20 years, and from my perspective, BP's current main product line doesn't seem to be necessarily aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Your top management seems to agree, and has recently made one of the most ambitious climate pledges of any oil and gas company. Can you help us understand what role BP Ventures as a corporate venture already plays in BP climate strategy?
Yeah, so, as you highlight, BP has currently announced a new purpose, reimagining energy for the people and the planet, with the ambition of being a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, which means tackling around 450 million tonnes of emissions, 55 million from our own operations and 360 million tonnes of carbon content from our upstream oil and gas production. So the change that we're going through is huge. The technologies that can be deployed in the short term are things that have been developed in BP and can make efficiency improvements. But to be really game changing, we need a combination of internally developed technologies that will develop through collaboration, and technologies that we can access through the market through startups. So BP Ventures as a group have been in operation since 2007. We are a strategic corporate investor. One of the main drivers that we have is to invest in companies, but to identify companies that can be strategic to us, and particularly on the journey over the next 10 years, where we're aiming not only just to provide capital to these companies, but provide revenue streams. So making sure that these are companies that are highly strategic and help us move on the direction from where we are today to where the company wants to be in the future. And as you may have seen from the BP a few weeks ago, there was a series of announcements about where BP want to be in the future. So setting targets for 2030 and then out to 2050. There is a big transition we need to go through, and the key thing here is we can't do this on our own with the technologies we have today.
Great, thank you, Martin. Mongo, just to also give you a chance to warm up a little bit. At Innovative Capital, you specialize in two sectors, healthcare and clean tech. And you've personally worked in the healthcare sector as well. Based on your experience, what do entrepreneurs and investors in the healthcare sector right? What do entrepreneurs and the investors in the clean tech sector get wrong?
Well, we certainly didn't prepare that one, did we? I think the way to look at this is the way that Yvette started off, and that is we have to look back. We've been through mega cycles in technology verticals. We went through the information and communication technology one, which started in the 70s, and it went through three waves. Then we had the biotech one, actually almost at the same time. So actually started in the late 60s from some of the developments, and that went through three phases. I'm of the opinion that CleanTech, it used to be called CleanTech, it's not called CleanTech anymore, It's now called Sustainable Technology Innovation or Climate Change or STD Technology Innovations, and many, many, many words. We're just starting that third wave. And in the first wave of each of these, and I can remember this, as you can tell by the gray hair, I was actually there in 77 and 78. And in fact, each time I get up on this stage, I have a little bit of a move, because in 1981, I opened a conference here with a company called Oracle. And there was a company called Microsoft here, and one or two other companies on the component side and the hardware side. I think the biggest, and you hit the nail on the head again, it's collaboration, it's cooperation. In the first wave, there was, say, 30 VCs maybe, and 10% of them, maybe 15% of them made a huge amount of money and got out, and everybody else lost money. Then in the second wave, you had probably 130 VCs, and again, the top 15 or 10% made huge amounts of money. But at that stage, it started to clean up, because it was at that stage that the corporate VCs started to come in. And that is when it really had to change, because you had the corporate, and not just corporate VCs, you had strategic interest in industries which had, up until then, been dominated by the VC. Now, bear in mind that the VC's role is to make money for their investor. The VC's role is not to accelerate impact. They're two very different things. But when you're coming to sustainability, we're going into this third wave. I think we have huge amounts of strategic interest coming in. We have political interest and lots more interest. But what's really interesting is here is an opportunity for us all to accelerate impact. So what is the optimum route to optimum impact? That's got to be speed. And I think the VCs are beginning to come around to the fact that if you accelerate revenues by 2 years, you accelerate value by 2 years. And I'm not putting all VCs into the same bucket, but if you think of the model, you think of their LPs, that is their job, to make money for their investors. It is not their job to accelerate impact. But I think now we can align the two for the first time. But it is the third wave of sustainability technology. And we've seen it in biotech, we've seen it in information and communications technology, and I think we're now beginning to mature. Does that answer your question, Dominic?
It does answer the question. It raises another one. And in fact, well, thanks for setting that stage. I want to pick up on what you said, that the role of the VC is not to make impact, it's to generate a return. And yet, CleanTech venture capital in many ways is sold to LPs and to society, from which it obtains its social license to operate, in part on a message of impact. And CleanTech has now been a thing for the better part of 2 decades, or CleanTech VC has been a thing for about 2 decades. And over this time, tens of billions have been invested in CleanTech innovation, in venture capital alone, not to speak of all the public R&D money and later stage financing that's gone into the space. And yet, last year, we set a record in carbon emissions, and this year we'll do a little bit better, but only because we're in the largest global pandemic in a century. And for next year, emissions are projected to go up again. So, I'd like to know, is CleanTech venture capital failing to deliver on its impact promise? Or, as Mongo just asserted, doesn't it even come with an impact promise?
Well, may I add something there, which is absolutely crucial to the whole thing, and it's not just because I'm a fan of the vets, but the one thing we have now in this technology vertical is a better gender balance than we ever had in any of the other ones. And when I set up Nomura's operation in 1994, it was Tonomura-san who insisted with me that we have gender balance in 1994 in our unit. We built a team of 65 people. Now, one of the great things about having gender balance is you have cooperation, you have collaboration. Everybody actually wants to work together, not to get to the top of the ladder before the next person. And I think that's a huge complement to what we now have, and how it will be better, and it will be faster, and it has to be better, and it has to be faster.
Thank you. And I also think maybe commenting on the role of, if I may, venture capitalists' role of only serving shareholder interests. I think there are, of course, there are still plenty of people in the world who only think that financial is the only but it's not for nothing that right now there's billions of money going into something which people call sustainable investments, and some of it may be whitewashing. I think this is our greenwashing, if you could call it. But the fact is that people are actually starting to realize you cannot see those separate from each other. You cannot only go for financial profits and kill the world. There is actually money to be made, and this is just money to be made, and this is just a down-to-earth kind of thing, is by making people's lives better. If you have more wealthy people, they have more money to spend. This is a cycle, so it does not have to be contradictory. Of course, at some point there is a balance, and one of the things, and this is maybe coming back to something I came across when I was working at EIF, there we also invested in very sort of classical setup of 10-year funds with 2 times 1 year extension, which sets a sort of time frame. And some technologies, and particularly the ones that I work on now, like sustainable chemistry technology, where you need, for instance, a lot of collaboration with corporates. So we always collaborate. This sometimes takes more time. On the other hand, the fact that you do try to take that financial model, it puts the pressure on to accelerate. So if you're talking about acceleration, I think it is about taking the best of both worlds. On the one hand, being conscious that you cannot do it alone, so you have to look not just at the money, but at the society. And on the other hand, I'm sorry.
We met Dominic's boss earlier. Yeah.
Yes. So sorry for taking too much time.
Sure.
It's not. I think the worlds are colliding. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, building on the point of collaboration, we need collaboration across the full value chain. So I've seen a number of cases where venture capitalists or strategic venture corporates have invested in technologies. There is great technology out there. It is ready to deploy. It can have a significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions or other life cycle analysis benefits. But there isn't a demand from the consumers because we haven't done a good enough job of selling this to the end consumer to say, this is a technology that can have a significant impact and offset other greenhouse gas emissions production technologies. So it's about the collaboration and making sure that you create the right technologies at the right time when they can then have a significant impact. So technologies being ready at the point when they can be deployed at scale and have the material impact. So investing in the right things at the right time is one of the key things I'd build on from what has just been mentioned by Yvette and Mungo.
Let me challenge you on this. When you say isn't demand from the consumer, doesn't supply determine demand in, for instance, an industry as centralized as the energy or the oil and gas industry? So is it really a tenable position for BP to say, well, our customers aren't asking for, say, electric mobility or hydrogen, when you keep serving that market with a cheap but dirty fuel?
So the market I was referring to wasn't necessarily in the fuel production space. So the example I was referring to is in concrete products, where there is a company that BP Ventures invested in, a company called Solidia Technologies, that produces a low carbon concrete product, which saves on greenhouse gas emissions and other benefits as well. You've got the end customer wants the product, but you've got to go across the full value chain. So the part that was missing is Solidia licenses the technologies to concrete product manufacturers who can sell their own products. So you need to get everybody in the value chain lined up and connected across. With regards to your comment about BP's current model, so yes, we do extract hydrocarbons, refine them, turn them into products. So we are meeting customer demands. We are also trying to create changes in the ecosystem and help with the adoption. So you gave an example there of electric vehicles. One of the investments that we made into a company is a company called Stordot, who are presenting later this morning, who've got a battery technology which we think is game-changing that allows a fast-charging battery technology. So therefore you can have a charge of an electric vehicle in 5 minutes. Because one of the big pushes that we've seen from all of the consumer work that we've done in the electric vehicle space is that people would like to have a similar EV charging experience to the experience they have with regards to liquid fuels. So one of the key investments we made there was to try and answer one of the key issues. The early key issues for the EV adoption was charging time. Because not everybody can at home, everybody can charge at work. People en route charging, and they want the en route charging quick. With regards to some of the other points you mentioned there, hydrogen. BP had a hydrogen for power business back in 2007, where we were looking to build large-scale hydrogen-powered, zero-emissions energy production, which needed a tax, guaranteed offtake on electricity. We tried several projects. Fortunately, those projects didn't get the required support to allow us to build them. So we have tried things and been ahead of the game. The point is, if you run too far ahead of the curve, you've got technology solutions ready before the world is ready to adopt them and get the support behind them. And from a government point of view, they've got a limited amount of money to support in certain areas, and it's making sure that what you bring to the market can get the right support to help you get down the cost curve, to be competitive with the other systems, to allow you then to deploy a number of technology options, help into the market. So it's a real balance between being too far ahead of the curve and being able to get in the right time of delivery of the technologies to the market when they can be adopted.
That's absolutely true. Actually, that reminds me now, going back to your question, a very short answer, Dominique, and what makes a good VC investor, it is to have your timing right.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you. We mentioned, or you mentioned collaboration multiple times in the past 10 minutes. We tend to agree, as you may be able to tell from Kirsten's remarks, that actually my personal experience looking after the nascent investment practice of Climate-KIC is that whenever we get contacted by VC firms, so not the corporate VCs, because firms like BP, they're used to collaboration in their core business, both on a corporate and a project level. And we find corporate VCs tends to be much more collaborative because it's just, in many ways, their mindset. For institutional VCs, however, we find that they all claim that they want to collaborate, but actually they would like to get access to the deal pipeline. And then, yes, if there's a co-investment opportunity, they'd be, more than happy for the co-investor to come along, but actually only if they, as a lead investor, don't want to do the round on their own. So in a way, only when it's self-serving. We haven't actually seen willingness from many firms to enter into truly strategic structural partnerships. And so the question I have to you, Yvette, is the competitive mindset of the venture industry still helpful, or is it time to move from competition to genuine strategic collaboration?
I didn't quite hear the question that well.
I'm happy to restate the question.
Dominic, could you repeat the question? We've got a little bit of an echo, please.
No problem. I'm very happy to do that. So the question is one of mindset. Is the competitive spirit of institutional venture capital still helpful for what we're trying to accomplish in the CleanTech space? Or is there a need for VCs to undergo a mindset change and move from competition to genuine strategic collaboration?
Is the institutional approach still helpful? Its current model, I think, is what the question is. And to what extent and how does it have to change to improve?
For the venture capital model, he means now in this case, or the
Well,
just
institutional investor as opposed to the corporate or the corporate VC or strategic investor.
And institutional, you're talking about government, for instance, institutions.
Good question.
What sort
Dominic,
of institution
in the term institution, are you including government, or is institution separate from government, separate from corporate?
No, I'm meaning the venture firms like Capricorn or Seth Ventures or Emerald Technology Ventures, so the specialized venture capital funds, as opposed to the corporate VC.
Okay, so specialized.
Yeah, Capricorn. Well, I think this is a question for me then. What's the difference? Well, we work together a lot with corporates. I think the difference is that Capricorn has the standard setup. So you have your 10-year fund in your 1+1. I think what's special about us is that we do get investors who really, they go for financial returns, but they care about the topic. Sustainable chemistry is such a specialized topic that people need to have some sort of understanding of it to be wanting to invest. And that's I guess, the luxury is also the challenge. But it means that if you look at, we collaborate a lot. We have co-investments with corporate venture capital firms as well. And what you see is that, of course, the timelines may be different because corporates, can take longer times. They don't necessarily always want to exit after, the fund after 10 years. And this does put a sort of question, and I haven't found I have to be honest, I don't find a one-cut answer. I think there's a place for different instruments, and that's probably the answer. It's not one answer. Because if you have the classical 10+1+1, as I said, it puts a lot of pressure. So at some point in time, when you get at the time you need to exit, you can get very non-constructive investor dynamics on the boards, and this is actually a reason why a lot of companies fail. On the other hand, if you do not have some sort of timeline, it takes off the acceleration pressure. So there's a balance to be made. So I think as a venture capitalist, as an independent one, as well as a corporate one, actually, any investor, you need to choose the investments out of the spectrum that's available that suit also some of the restrictions of your fund. And that means there is an overlap, there's a place where we meet, and that's where we can work together. There's also a place where we do not meet, and that's where you get certain ventures that might actually be more suitable for family office investments, or some that are suitable for venture capital. It's not because it's right or wrong, it's just because there are multiple factors that determine the speed of a venture coming to commercialization. And again, actually the point that was made is the timing. When do you get on? Yeah, that would be my answer.
Dominic, may I turn it round the other way? Because the experience that I had in the life science industry sort of got us to a point where the innovator is so important. If you don't make the innovator happy, the innovator leaves. The innovator leaves, and you don't have the consistency in the science and everything else. So you have a scientist that's been working on the same molecule for 18 years before it goes into its first human. And then when it goes into its first human, you've got 15 years of clinical trials to go. So if that scientist was 62 years old at that point, or was 17, it makes a huge difference in how the collaboration between the investors and the investee need to work. So I think one of the most important things is flexibility, and to be able to be flexible. Some investors are happy for somebody to come in and take, or some innovators are happy for somebody to come in and take 80% of their company. Others are not. And again, in the life science industry, look at some of the synthetic royalty structures that were put in place. So somebody would put forward, how much money do you need for the next 5 years? I need 10 million. Right, here it is. In return for that, you're going to give me from first year revenue 10%, then 9%, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the next 10 years, I'm going to share in the revenue. I don't want a chunk in your company. I'll be on your board, or I'll have rights of one sort or another. But that is how the life science industry really, really, really accelerated. And there were a number of organizations that did that. And I think it's really having that flexibility and being able to work with the innovator as well as the institution, as well as the potential customer base, and as well as with the, the corporate. And maybe it's a license approach, but it's different every time. That's the problem. And what we find is, because we're representing the interest of the innovator, I know it sounds weird for an investment banker to say that he's representing the interests of somebody else, but that's what we do. Years of experience doing it the wrong way, and I think that, again, the more we can collaborate with the buy side, then we can actually hold the hand of the sell side, or the innovator, as it were, and actually structure something that's right. Because if they're gone, they get up and go one day, then you've lost the basis of the science, and then you're thrashing around wondering how you're going to fix it.
Well, I want to drill a little bit deeper into this question of instrument and the way the transactions happen. You mentioned revenue sharing as a model, whereas from my personal experience and observation in CleanTech venture capital, the standard model still is cash for preferred equity. Would you say that there's a need for the CleanTech VC community to become a little bit more creative in designing different instruments that speak to different types of innovation?
Wait, is that at me, or was that at you, or was that at Martin?
No, that's at you, Mungo.
Oh, yes, is the answer. This is all about innovation. So why do we talk about innovation in technologies and innovation on how to implement them and everything else, and we don't talk about innovation in finance? Why should that be the only component that doesn't need any innovation because it's so perfect? So yes, my argument would be that innovation is essential in finance, and again, I think that the more we have a gender balance in finance, we will begin to realize, and it will be proven, that cooperation and collaboration works a lot better than, I got a better deal out of it than you did. And so in answer, a simple answer, yes, we have to innovate in finance.
Brilliant. And Martin, BP Ventures has made over 40 investments over the, since it started. Can you give us an example of where a particularly creative way of making the investment has turned out to be particularly useful and successful from the strategic perspective of BP?
So all of the investments that we make are strategic. So so in the very early start of venturing in BP, it was very much to support our alternative energy business. So we were hedging against technologies that we were developing internally. So after about 3 or 4 years, we changed the business model to be a lot more collaborative. So initially we were taking low equity stakes and taking a range of investments. Over the last 10 years, we've become a lot more strategic, and we've changed the business model that we want to target a certain percentage ownership, to have influence on the company, to be able to have a board seat to help guide the company going forward. And one of the key things we look for as a strategic investor is, as I highlighted before, to bring the capital to the company to take an equity share, but also to bring them revenue. And the way we bring them revenue is through a strategic relationship with a specific part of BP and a specific business. Where the acceleration of the deployment of the technology leads specifically to an enhancement of a particular part of BP. So an example in the low carbon space is that BP invested in a company called Tricoya. Tricoya make acetylated wood products. So these are wood products that can last without treatment between 20 and 50 years, depending on the usage case. So you can then have wood products that can start to compete with concrete and steel in the construction industry, and start to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of that as a sector. One of the main reasons that we got involved in this is that one of the major feedstocks used in the acetylation process is acetic anhydride, which is a product that BP produce. And 80% of that material today goes into one particular use case. What we were looking at here is getting a secondary major demand for a product that BP produce. So it was diversifying the products that our products go into, but also being able to produce something that has a superior product performance in a completely different sector. So that is an example of where we've looked to diversify where our feedstocks enter, their uses, and how we can be impacting a kind of the global system.
Mm-hmm. And like maybe another example is a collaboration with a corporate. We have, for instance, we have SCG, and we have and also another Japanese. The SCG is a Thai chemistry company as an LP in our fund. And they, although they did not have an own venturing arm like BP has, they are very interested in some of the technologies. And because they have a vision of having a 50% reduction on or becoming carbon neutral, I forget exactly the year, they are looking for innovation technologies. So for instance, a company in our portfolio is Black Bear Carbon. It recycles waste tires into virgin grade carbon black. And this company actually is also co-investor. They had the option to become a co-investor, so they co-invest alongside, but we manage actually the board seat. We have an investment as our fund as well. And this is another example of how corporates and venture capitalists can actually collaborate. So yeah, some of these, corporates, yes, they can have a different window. As I said, there are different instruments they can decide to use. They can invest themselves, or they can decide to invest with a fund that is in the space that makes sense to them, and actually build and leverage the knowledge that we also have in this space without having to do the venturing activity on their own.
Dominic, I know you're remote from us, but we have a microphone here in the room. Would now be a time to ask if anybody in the room has a question? They'd like to cross-examine you, for example, since we've been cross-examined for half an hour.
Those of you who are listening through Zoom, you may have a chance to put also a question in the chat room. But yes, there's a microphone in the room in Monaco, and if there is a question from the audience, then let's take it now.
Where's Connor? You got the questions?
Any questions here?
Any questions in the room? No. No questions in the room.
All right, so whilst people are making up their mind, I would like to put another question to Yvette. Yvette, you have worked for the EIF, which is a public sector investment instrument. Based on that experience, what is your view of the role that the public sector needs to be playing going forward over the next 10 years? And to what extent do CleanTech VCs need to change the way that they interact and engage with public sector actors?
Well, I think it's interesting because working at EIF, the EIF as a government, a European institution, can take sometimes a role of pushing or forcing a new way of thinking onto a sector. It sounds a bit, it's not like we should be, it is all top down, but if the market mechanics seem to sort of not, the natural market doesn't seem to keep the speed with what the society needs, that's where a government institution can temporarily bridge that. To give you one example is when I led the social and environmental impact team, we had a special vehicle that was only for impact funds. And we obliged the fund managers who get an investment from that fund to report on impact, and as well as, of course, financial returns, and actually tie the carry that they get at the end of the road to meeting their performance or the impact targets as well. Now, this is not common practice. We were sort of the first pushing it as EIF, of course. When you're the biggest venture capital investor in Europe, you have a sort of position that you can introduce these kind of mechanisms. And now, actually, we see it comes slowly, but you see some other, it's also in the CleanTech space, environmental space, there are some fund managers now voluntarily say, we are going to report on impact because we see that it's been more important, or we are going to actually tie at least part of our carry to meeting our impact targets. We're going to be reporting. This is just an example of a role that an institution like that can take. Maybe one thing that going forward, it would be a question. I'm not sure if we can do that now. I'm stepping out of my, that was still the EIF part. Now I'm stepping out in my own view as a person is one, like I said, one struggle I have not quite solved yet is that maybe there should also be a way of allowing sort of venture capital funds not to only take this classical 10+1+1 format. At the moment, the EIF is obliged to do so because the investors that actually that provide the funding for EIF, they have a limit in which the capital must be returned. Even though, if you would think about it, if we look at, there's a lot of money in our society, like pension funds, who do not necessarily need the liquidity after 15 years. So if you could, as government, actually go beyond that, and this is I'm not saying that EIB or EF is going to do that, because it was one of the more challenging parts for me as a person, where I thought maybe we need to be able to broaden our field of instruments. I must say we did that also. For instance, social impact bonds is something very different. That was never invested by a venture capital community. And in my team, we introduced the first social impact bond investments. And it meant pushing also internally against structures. And every time when one of my team members would defend a deal like that with a different instrument, I would come along and we would have a sort of internal challenge session on, okay, what does that mean? Because if you come from actually risk profile that you're used to, for instance, doing debt, which is the EIB, and then EIF is a little bit more risk embracing because they invest in equities, it's the daughter, then still people are not used to, for instance, so what happens if you have a social impact bond where you actually introduce, I don't know if everybody knows it, but it's a tripartite agreement between a social intervention, sort of a social organization solving a social problem for the benefit of society, and the end payer is going to be a government institution. So you need a tripartite agreement, which is not understood. So I think this is interesting, just to come back then and summarize, is that the public institutions should actually take a step forward in knowing where it should be going. And sometimes if market mechanisms are too slow because people are just used to doing what they do, they can help to pull with regulation, with instruments, they can push the market into certain directions. Even the mechanism of carbon credits now, maybe it's not there yet where we want it to be. But 20 years ago didn't exist. So there are many ways in which they can sort of try to mend the gap that's there maybe between the standard market mechanisms and the changing society.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Mongo, do we have a question from the audience in Monaco?
Do we have a question in the audience? Yes, we do. Just coming. I have a question while this question's being lined up. How about you guys working on the European government to abolish capital gains tax or any tax on investment in sustainable technology investment? There's zero revenue coming to the European governments right now from tax on sustainable investment. So why don't you ask them to abolish it now? And then what we'd have is, I think
let me put it on the to-do list.
A tidal wave then. So we do have a question in the room.
Hey guys, George Prasinos from Oxto Energy. I'm a bit curious. When you evaluate risk, is like the effect of a technology kind of considered, or it is purely financial risk that's been calculated?
Did you?
Is it pure financial?
Yeah.
No.
Should we pass the question to Dominic? Did you hear the question, Dominic?
Sorry, Dominic, go ahead.
No, could you repeat it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when there is a decision to be made for an investment, is it purely focused on the risk on the financial returns or also on the technology itself, like what it can bring?
You mean in terms of impact?
Exactly, yes.
I mean, I have a view of how we operate at Climate-KIC, but we have a very specific mandate from the European Commission as the representatives of society to make sure that we do in fact support technologies that, first and foremost are impactful, because we're here to help Europe solve its climate challenge. Now, I put that question back to the season. Maybe Martin, you can weigh in. What is the role of non-financial benefits in your evaluation? And actually ties quite nicely to what Yvette said about social impact. Are we in fact, too much concerned with financial impact and not enough with not just environmental impact, but also social impact?
So from a BP point of view, every investment that we look to do is a balance of risk. There can be financial risks, technical risks, social risk, market risk. So it's really bringing together, and also people risk of the management team, the technology team. Mungo highlighted a good question. The developer of the technology, if they're going to leave the startup after you've invested, that isn't an ideal situation either. So everything is always a balance, and it's finding the right balance of risks which is appropriate for the investor. Different investors like to take a different risk profile and view of risk of the different startups. But evaluating the wider impact of some of the investments in some of the startups is something that we are starting to look to do. So we've got room for improvement. We're not there yet. We're not ideal, but there's more different factors and different lenses we can look through when we're making investments.
Brilliant. So, that might be actually an opportunity for real strategic collaboration. So thanks for ending on that note. We're actually out of time for this panel, which is great news because that means we're going to move into a very interesting next phase of the conference. I would like to thank my fellow panelists, Yvette Go, Martin Sellers, and Mungo Park for a fascinating conversation. I wish all of the entrepreneurs good luck in presenting their companies over the next 2 days, and everybody else an experience of inspiration and education in what the world of clean tech innovation has been busy working on over the past few years. So thank you to all, and I hand back to the conference managers.
Thank you, Dominique.
So that's a big thank you to Dominic. I hope that was, as we had a little difficulty hearing from behind the speakers here, but I hope you heard everything more clearly than we did. So now I'm happy to announce it's a coffee break, isn't it? It's a coffee break. So we'll see you having a coffee in a minute, and we're back on at 10:50 for Alexis. Alexis.